Welcome everyone to the Friday afternoon series. Debbie McRae is here as always with lots of great content. I shared before, I probably shared Debbie's material for betrayed partners more than anything else because it's so helpful for partners, but it's also really helpful for the betraying partner as well because like there's content about what's going on and helping understand. So I think you'll find this really interesting, and we have a whole library of Debbie's and other things on our website under previously recorded webinars. So check those out. So, but what do you have for us today, Debbie?
Well, today we are going to talk about what the betrayed partner can do if their betraying partner isn't in recovery or fully in recovery. So, I will share with you a little bit of what I've seen recently. And as you know, I come into this webinar each time thinking about what have I been seeing in my office, what is showing up in my groups. So, here's several examples of what I've seen recently. One is the betraying partner who comes home after seeing a therapist for a few sessions and then reports that they don't have a problem, that they're actually fixed. That's one. Another example I've seen is the betraying partner who doesn't see their pornography as a problem and therefore don't feel like they need to have any kind of help, even though the betrayed partner hasn't consented for that to be part of the relationship. Another one is the betraying partner who minimizes the impact of their behaviors on the betrayed partner. And so they don't feel like a formal therapeutic disclosure is warranted, and they're not willing to share any kind of information. So when you're in this type of a situation as a betrayed partner, it throws you into a whole different um, area of recovery where I see a lot of the betrayed partners in fear and stuck in fear and not able to move on and kind of looping around in their recovery. So today we're going to talk about what does a betrayed partner do when the betraying partner is in recovery limbo. We're going to call it recovery limbo. As we know, betrayal trauma is one of the most devastating experiences that a person can have. So, when you're in relationship with someone who is struggling with an addiction or out of control sexual behaviors, oftentimes they will have a lot of denial. They will go into their shame. They get very, very defensive, and they're not willing to do what it takes to create safety for the betrayed partner. And so that traps them, like I said, in that cycle of fear and uncertainty. It's a very, very difficult place to be. Oftentimes, I see betrayed partners coming in so much fear, and as a result, they move into a lot of control behaviors. I did another webinar on the fear cycle, so refer to that for some more details on that and how that shows up and what you can do to get out of it. But the fear and the uncertainty is what is going to happen? Are we going to get this fixed? If he can't or she can't see, they're out of control sexual behaviors as a problem, and if they're not willing to get help, then how are we ever going to repair this? And they have a tendency to live in the future, the constant fear of the what ifs. And so that's where they get stuck. And then the control comes in I've got to figure out how to fix this. I've got to maybe even watch over my betraying partner's behaviors to make sure that I'm safe, that we're safe. So today we're going to kind of answer some of the questions that around, gosh, how do I myself as a betrayed partner move forward if the betraying partner isn't in recovery? What do I do about that? How do I handle the recovery limbo? So let's talk a little bit about the aspects of recovery limbo. So it's when the betraying partner really won't take responsibility or the appropriate responsibility for the wounding and the traumatizing behaviors that the betrayed partner is experiencing. Um, they may even want you to go back to normal and let's go back to it's all good, right? Let's go back to how we were. I just want to get us back to when things were good. And so in that, they are not addressing the hurt and the pain and not wanting to talk about the specifics. I just want to get back to normal. The betrayed partner may feel like they are emotionally bleeding. They've just had disclosure and discovery Or maybe they had it a number of years ago and it's never been addressed. And so they're just waiting in this constant state for the other shoe to drop because their partner's not in recovery and the shoes drop. So that's a very, very difficult state. It's living with someone who should be in recovery and they're choosing not to do recovery. I often talk to betrayed partners about two aspects that they can kind of assess about their partner in recovery. One of them being capacity, which is having the skill set, the tools to do recovery. The other being willingness. And willingness is the motivation. And true recovery requires that the addict partner, the betraying partner, have that internal intrinsic motivation, meaning I want to be in recovery and I want to heal my addiction for myself. I also want to do it because I know in the long run, it's going to be better for my marriage, my relationship, my future. But when there is not the willingness, that's where I see those betrayed partners stuck in that recovery limbo with the betraying partner. It's feeling stuck when you go to have a conversation about safety and it goes kind of in a circle, right? We have this constant, I'm asking you, here's what I need for recovery. Would you be willing to do this? And they're not willing to do it. So there's that resistance. So in today's webinar, we're going to talk about how do I, as a betrayed partner, feel like I'm back in my own power? What can I control in a healthy way? So we're going to talk about it through the lenses of about 6 different areas. One of it's going to be boundaries. We're going to talk about self-care. We're going to talk about safety seeking and how to do the healthier type of safety seeking. And we're going to talk about some other tools that you can utilize to help you kind of move forward. I do want to go through, before we step into that, a list that I shared a number of years ago on some signs that maybe the addict partner, the betraying partner, is struggling with recovery. So keep this in mind through what I just shared, through the capacity and through willingness. So we're talking about willingness here. How willing are they to do recovery? How willing are they to make changes? And how willing are they to implement and integrate recovery tools? So I'm going to talk about just 7 different indicators. One is that the betraying partner isn't completely open and honest and transparent in all aspects of their lives. Another one would be they're overconfident in their recovery. Oh, I'm fine. I don't need to go to the therapist, but just once a month. Oh, gosh, I'm doing better than all the other guys in my recovery group. Or they might even turn it on you and say, well, I'm doing recovery a lot better than you are. That's another indicator. Another one is they have isolating behavior. So it may increase. It could be even similar to what they were acting like prior to disclosure discovery. So that's very, very frightening for a betrayed partner. They might be experiencing and displaying mood swings. So all of a sudden they're very irritable. And again, that could remind the betrayed partner of behaviors previous to discovery disclosure. They might minimize any slips in their recovery plan, even including some of their bottom line behaviors. They might rationalize, they might get very defensive about it. Another indicator is you don't see them going through the routines and rituals of recovery, meaning they're doing self-care, they're seeing their therapist, they're attending a group regularly. So you're not seeing that consistency in the recovery work they're doing. And then lastly, there is a resistance or an unwillingness to provide safety for the betrayed partner. And they're not willing to do the things that the betrayed partner needs for rebuilding trust. So here's the 6 things we're going to talk about as far as the betrayed partner and what they can consider doing while they are stuck in this recovery limbo. The first one is to identify and establish good internal and external boundaries. So I could go on about this for a very, very long time. If you want to know more, then you can join my boundaries group. But today we're going to talk a little bit, just briefly, about boundaries. So 2 types of boundaries. We have internal boundaries, which are the boundaries I put in place for myself. I like to call these me boundaries. So when I put these boundaries, and boundaries are about safety, I'm creating safety. That means I'm creating safety so other people are safe with me. External boundaries are the boundaries I put in place. It's the framework I put in place with other people so that I am safe with them. So when I'm safe with somebody, I can move towards them. So boundaries, when we put them into place, there's the boundary along with the consequence. And the consequence is what you are going to do, right, when the other person's behaviors cause you to feel unsafe. So typically, it's going to be something that you will either move towards them or away from them. So if you're safe, I can move towards you. If you're unsafe, I move away. So let me give you some examples of an external boundary. One would be if you blame me in a conversation, right, where I'm trying to share with you my fears and concerns, then I'm going to call a stop to the conversation, exit the conversation, and go do self-care. Okay. An internal boundary might be I'm going to recognize when I'm in my fear and I'm doing unhealthy safety seeking, and I'm going to replace them with something more healthy. Now, how that's going to impact you as a betrayed partner is this, is if you're doing unhealthy safety seeking, it's going to take you down a rabbit hole. You're going to become more emotionally dysregulated. And so the next time you're around your betraying partner, most likely you're going to become dysregulated with them. So that's why that's a really good internal boundary. Okay. It's really important to speak up and to verbalize your boundaries. You have to be, as a betrayed partner, really open, honest, and authentic. There is fear in setting boundaries. The fear is I'm going to set a boundary and you're going to reject me or move away from me or criticize me. But it is so important that you understand what you need for safety. This is where you need help with either a really good support group that's focus is on recovery from betrayal trauma and a good therapist who understands betrayal and can guide you on that. So some examples, we've got to share our feelings, what I'm feeling. We're going to share what my experience is. We're going to share even their thoughts that I have about it. And then we're going to share the boundary. I often talk about the 4-part talking boundary. In fact, I put that on repeat. So we share what we've heard, what we've seen. We share the emotion that comes up because I'm moving into a story. So step number 2, after I share the data and what I'm seeing, hearing, then I'm going to share what I think about it. Here's the story I'm in. Here's my thoughts about that. Here's the feeling and emotion. And now here's the boundary. Here's what I'm going to do. So it might be if you continue to use porn, I can't be emotionally close to you. So when you report to me that you can have continuous slips, the thinking I'm in is that you're not safe, and it makes me feel really sad, and it makes me feel insecure. So I'm going to step away and go do some self-care, and I may be a little more distant over the next few days while I'm reestablishing safety. So something along those lines, okay? So what are some of the boundaries you can put into place if you're wondering? Well, it might be to put a boundary around the addict partner sharing their recovery or their relapse prevention plan. It could be not having any pornography in the home. So we have filters in place. It might be how you can participate in the relationship with your betraying partner. It might be that we can talk about recovery topics, right? Certain times of the day or night. It could be around physical touch. It could be around the topics that you talk about. It might be boundaries around anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. It could be if conversations go poorly, here's what we're going to do. It could be if you choose not to go to see your therapist on a regular basis, I'm going to feel unsafe, and therefore I'm going to step back. I might even choose to sleep in another room until I feel safe enough to join you again, especially if you're having repeated slips. So boundaries do need to put into place. Now, I'm going to give you a side note here. And the side note is, I know betrayed partners are in a lot of fear. And oftentimes in their fear, they go a little boundary crazy. And so they might put together 40 boundaries. And so we have to stop and we have to think about what is the most important in the here and now. What are some of the things that we really need to establish safety in? And then through the process of rebuilding trust and connection, we continue to add additional boundaries. So work very closely with your therapist on really whittling those down if you have a lot of them. And just recognize that you're doing this because not only do you want the relationship to work. You want to heal. You want your addict partner to heal. But you're also just trying to establish safety. Okay. So remember, with boundaries, we do have to implement the consequences. So make sure that if you have a consequence, you're willing to do it. So you have to verbalize it. If you set a boundary and you never do anything, then it's going to be ineffective. Remember, the goal of a consequence is not punishment, it's creating safety. So that's a very, very important thing to remember. It's about creating safety for yourself. It's about whether or not I can move near you or I have to move away from you to establish that safety. So it could be if you continue to withhold information from me, then I might have to consider stepping out of the relationship, and I don't want to do that. So I need you to be open, honest, and really transparent with me. Okay. Second area, you have to engage in self-care practices. This is so instrumental in emotional regulation and in moving forward in your healing. So, setting boundaries with yourself around doing self care, it's about nurturing yourself. It's about establishing a self care routine that promotes physical, spiritual, emotional, relational, and mental well being. It's about choosing every day to do something in each of those areas. It's about learning about your nervous system and what you can do and coming up with a trigger plan, an emergency self care plan that when I get triggered, here's what I can do to emotionally regulate. Everybody's nervous system is different. So what works for one person won't work for the other. So it might be breathing works well for me, and it might be for somebody else, I have to listen to somebody talking to me, or I have to go out and walk, or I need to go exercise in order to regulate. So understand the 2 or 3 things you can do to help you regulate. It's working on staying out of your distorted negative stories. I talk often about how the brain works. The brain, because of its negative bias, likes to interpret situations through a negative lens. So when I'm a betrayed partner and I've gone through the trauma of discovery and disclosure, my brain is going to be very active in taking bits and pieces of information, filling in the gaps, and I'm going to have that running as a constant dialogue in my head. I also refer to that as monkey mind. So when our monkey minds are really, really loud, we have to choose to calm them. So we can do anything with bilateral movement, which is going to be things like going out and walking. It could be swimming, biking, running. It could be cross-body tapping. But what we've got to do is we've got to calm the mind down. It could be journaling. It could be doing a journal dump where you take all the words in your head and everything you're thinking about and just put it on a journal page and then put the journal away and you don't read again. Or taking that page you've just dumped on and tearing it up into little pieces and throwing it away. But you have to have some type of self-care routine around those thoughts because I call it takes you down the rabbit hole. And when you're down the rabbit hole, it doesn't feel good. So you can do things like attending yoga. You can journal, connect with a support group. The quickest way we emotionally regulate is through healthy human connection. So make sure you have people around you to support you. The third area is you've got to cease unhealthy safety-seeking behaviors. So how do I know if a safety-seeking behavior is not healthy? Typically, 2 things happen. It causes you to emotionally dysregulate, and you step out of your value system and you do things you wouldn't normally do. So you might rage, you might get angry, you might spy, you might do all sorts of things that you normally wouldn't do. You get over controlling. The other thing that occurs with unhealthy safety seeking is it creates disconnection in the relationship with the betraying partner. So when we think of safety seeking, we want it to create safety. So we have to intentionally step out of those behaviors. So we can't constantly monitor where our betraying partner is 24/7. We can't constantly have them on FaceTime or cameras set up around the house or having them report, every minute of every hour where they're at. We have to learn to step out of that. So constantly checking phones, checking locations, even interrogating and doing the interrogation type disclosures are going to create a false sense of security. It's a false sense. And it ultimately leads to more anxiety, more fear, more worry. And instead, we've got to, instead of focus externally on how I can create safety with the betraying partner, I've got to focus on how do I create safety within myself. And that's where, when I talked about self-care, it's those practices that help you. So, for example, instead of checking your partner's phone all the time, it might be that if you feel fear come up around what might be on their phone, you approach the betraying partner and share with them, here's what's going on for me. Maybe you need reassurance. Maybe you want to look at their phone. But eventually, what we want to see is, as you're doing all your self-care and recovery work, then you're going to start healing, and that unhealthy safety seeking behavior will decrease. So it's very important that you analyze, what type of safety seeking are you doing? The fourth area is to develop a support network. So healing in isolation is really difficult. You have to have support. Seek out the right kind of therapist. I get clients coming in that went to therapists with all good intentions that really did not understand betrayal trauma, and it created even more discomfort, more distress, more painful emotions because of that. So make sure you've got a good therapist. Interview your therapist, talk to several, see which one feels like a good fit. But find those that specialize in the area of recovery that you need support and help with. Find support groups, whether it is some type of a church recovery group, support group, could be a 12-step, it could be a regular 12-step for partners, or a betrayal trauma recovery group. Really, really important to get the information you need to understand betrayal trauma, what it's like, how it presents, what you do about it, what are kind of the different stages and phases of healing from betrayal trauma. Really important. I also encourage those that I work with, the betrayed partners, to put together a list of support people. So I tell them, when you're in distress, you've got to reach out. So ask yourself and identify, who is the person I can call when I'm feeling depressed or anxious? Who can I call if I'm feeling lonely? Who will be the one person who can come over and be with me if I need company? Who is the person, rather, that I can turn to and they will hold space for me and just let me talk and they will listen? Which person, when I call them, will encourage me to get out of the house and go do something fun, and they'll go with me? And which is the person that when I call them, they're going to remind me of my self-care plan and maybe give me ideas on what to do? So it's very, very important that you develop and you don't isolate. You've got to develop that support system. Area 5 is to focus on your own personal growth. So instead of focusing externally, like we talked about, on the betraying partner, you've got to focus on yourself. So learn about the fear cycle and your control behaviors, your release behaviors. Come up with routines and rituals that will help you increase your window of tolerance or your bandwidth to handle stress. The more you do self-care, the more stress you can handle in any given moment. Build your emotional skill set. So I think of it as tools in a tool belt. Come up with what works for you. If you know journaling works for you, if you know going out in nature works for you, but establish a morning routine of several recovery things you can do, and create and establish a nighttime routine. Start small and add to it if you feel overwhelmed. Recognize what you're already doing, those healthy things that you're already doing, and put them in your tool belt and continue using those. But be very intentional about working on you. That is so, so important. Don't allow yourself to become a label, a betrayed partner. You also have to look at other aspects of your life. So as you're working on your personal growth, maybe there's other things you can do to balance out all of the recovery work. Maybe you're somebody who plays a musical instrument. Get back into playing a musical instrument. I talked to somebody this past week about getting into art. They love art. So let's do that too. So you have other aspects of your life. I've had other betrayed partners join a book group, and it's not on any kind of a self-help book. It's all on the appropriate type of fiction book. And they find that meeting with other people and talking about something other than recovery is very, very refreshing. So explore new hobbies, take a class. I've had some women even come in and start taking classes because they're looking ahead and maybe have a career goal. So don't just identify as a betrayed partner. You have to hold on to you as well. And then lastly, I already talked about this somewhat, and that is seek professional counseling. Have a therapist who can help you navigate the trauma, the grief from betrayal trauma, all the complexities, somebody who can help you if your partner doesn't want to do formal therapeutic disclosure, they can help you continue to heal. Um, a therapist who understands betrayal and can guide you was a lifesaver for me. I know in my own betrayal. It was knowing that I was going in weekly or every 2 weeks. It was very, very grounding for me. It was very stabilizing for me. I had somebody who could validate me, who could have empathy for me, who could help me process trauma in the moment if I needed to in that session, or even just gave me ideas on how to go back out and continue my healing work. So it's really important that you don't do your recovery without the right kind of support and help. So, those are the areas. Hopefully, some of the things that I've shared with you today will help you if you find yourself as a betrayed partner, kind of stuck in watching your betraying partner in that recovery limbo.
I love that you use the term recovery limbo. I hadn't thought of it, but I was like, oh my gosh, that is, absolutely the case. And I was thinking you were talking about the tool belt, but I was like, if you've got a tool belt, you have more than one tool, like because yes, like I like breathing exercises and things like that, but I may not be necessarily in a place where I can, sit down and do, 2 minutes of grounding and whatever. I mean, so I want to have different things. I also, because I remember you shared before too, you talked about having the different friends. So like, this is the one I call, if I'm anxious or depressed, this is the one that's going to get me back on track. This is the one that's, we're going to go have coffee and just laugh, and having the different people. And you even talked about like, personal growth, and that it doesn't have to be just on recovery work. Yes, learning to regulate, of course, key and all that, but it could be taking art. It can be, taking up music, even if you never did it before, but you've always been interested. Or there's some things that you'd like to pursue, or a career, or whatever. But looking broader. And I really love that you were like, don't let it be that you're just a betrayed partner. Like yes, that has happened, and that's part of this, and it's going to be woven into the fabric. But to get stuck in that would be so limiting, and hard to address. I of course put my highlighter in the drawer. I was cleaning, and that was not a good idea. But and going back to willingness, and Dr. Rob talks about with clients, it can work with almost anybody, but the willingness, and in the 12-step books, it says willingness is the key. We have to do that. And you were also talking about like the safety seeking, the unhealthy safety seeking, and which turns into control, which of course then causes resentment for the addict partner. But it also keeps the addict partner from showing up with any willingness, because there's an external force on, called a betrayed partner, who is kind of driving the bus, for recovery. So regulating is so key for partners, in all of this. And I know that you're talking about the fear and how to identify unhealthy, safety seeking, and I'm sure in the moment, a brain is going, no, it's healthy safety seeking. Like it's got to be very difficult to think it through and go, is this really going to help? So I feel like that's a really big hurdle to start to be able to identify. Let me stop and pause and then think it through. So please,
Yeah.
yeah.
Let me add to that because I love what you said. Sometimes we have to do the unhealthy safety seeking,
Mm,
recognize, oh my gosh, that's outside my values, right? That didn't work. And I think in that moment when you finally come to that realization, sit down then and work on your plan. Figure
mm,
out how you're not going to get there again. I believe we all make mistakes and they are learning opportunities. So once I am regulated again, that's when I need to get really clear with myself on the fact that it was unhealthy and what am I going to do instead. And then write it down. You have to write it down. Put it in your first aid kit. I have my group members put together all the tools that they have in a little pouch or bag or whatever, a box to help them emotionally regulate. So put that in there with all your other tools. So when you want to go do the safety seeking, right, you can go back and look at it. It's written down. I'm going to tell you, if you're limbic and in the moment, you're not going to think what those steps are. You're not going to be able to bring them up because the brain doesn't operate that way, right? I lose all logic, reasoning, and emotional regulation. So I need the reminder. Really, really important. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, but and I'm even thinking like, even recognizing like I'm not in my thinking part of the brain, and to switch and go, hey, I'm gonna take a few minutes and ground. If this is a good idea now, it'll be a good idea in 20 minutes after I've had time to, think it through, et cetera. And but it's so hard to get from that, place of, I'm betrayed, like this is all unsafe, I don't trust any, like all of those things, that cause the dysregulation to be able to, just slow it all down. This is tough stuff. So I always appreciate all of your, oh, like you said, learn your nervous system. I was like, oh yeah, like there are physiological things going on, and to start paying attention to, oh, if I'm starting to get that niggle in my gut, if I'm starting to get a tightening in my chest, like, what is going on in my body, and it can be different places, different things for different people, so what is going on, that, and paying attention to the, it's like I'm going to catch this at stage one instead of waiting till it's, all the way out, but yeah, anyway, okay. So we have a question. There was something else I was going to ask you, but I can't remember. Okay, betrayed partner, 4 years since discovery. We are working on rebuilding and making good progress. Physical sexual intimacy feels so foreign to me, and when I think about it, I get that ick feeling with him or anyone. I know this is a direct result of the betrayal and is protective. How do I begin to heal this part of me?
Um, Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm so glad that you guys are working on rebuilding and making good progress. And so you're right. When we get to a certain point in recovery and healing, we have to address that physical sexual part of the relationship that's been damaged. And so there's several ways to do it. I do think you need to find a good couples therapist who understands this. And there's some really good resources out there. So let me talk about the resources and we'll talk about some other things. But I really like Erotic Intelligence. It's a great book. I believe it's by Alexandra Katie Hawkes. Um,
Katahakis, yes,
Katie
yes.
Hawkes, thank
She's
you.
Greek, so yes,
Thank you.
Katahakis, yeah.
Thank you. And so that is a really great book because it is addressed from the viewpoint of when you've had addiction and it's part of, the sexuality in the couple, what that's like, and some of the ways to work through this. I think that's really, really important. For you, it might also be doing some of your own individual work. I do love Emily Nagoski's book, where the Come As You Are book. When I work with groups, we read that book and kind of go through that. She's got some great concepts in there to help you kind of understand where you're at and to be able to communicate and talk through with your partner. Here's what I need. So she talks about the brakes and the gas pedal. And the gas pedal is, what do we need to feel safe in order to physically and sexually connect? And then what are the brakes? What's prevent me from doing that? So right now, your brakes are the fact that you feel like you got to still self-protect. You've also had betrayal, and so it doesn't feel safe. There's some great approaches. A mindfulness approach is really, really good. So maybe finding a therapist who can guide you on how do we engage in mindfulness practices that are going to help us create safety. I love Sensate Focus, a therapist who does Sensate Focus, where we do a little bit at a time. We're re-engaging over the course of time, but we're creating safety. We're also communicating. There's a lot of dialogue around it. We're journaling. We're coming back and sharing it with our therapist so that, we are figuring out how to reestablish, right, a new physical sexual relationship where there is safety. And it's much more complicated than what I can share in this webinar, but it is an aspect that we really have to address when we get to a certain point. Because the goal and the hope is that in that recovery, we can get to a place where there is true healthy sexual intimacy in the right way, where we're fully present in our bodies and really connecting. So a good therapist can give you techniques and ideas and ways to do that. And so think of it as a journey. It's not a destination. Think of it as it's going to be something, a learning that you're doing along the way. And it's going to be a great opportunity for you to communicate about things that maybe in the past have been really difficult to communicate around. But in the end, I have couples who see me, and as we work on that and they get into couples therapy and work on that, they find that they have a very fulfilling physical sexual intimacy in their relationship. But you have to do the work. You can't do it on your own. You do need somebody who understands it and can guide you.
When you're sorry, when you're working with couples, I agree. The sensate, all of those things, sensate, focus, touch comes up often. But I was also thinking, you as the betrayed partner, are struggling with fear, and yeah, I often hear from the addict partner that they're fearful too. And I'm wondering if you guys are talking about that, like you're both coming at this, with fear and scary situations, and and having a therapist work with you each and both, to identify those feelings. But yeah, Sensate Focus Touch, Dr. David Fawcett talks often in webinars about that too. It's Masters and Johnson, but having somebody work with you. There are some IICS therapists who are sex therapists, but also understand addiction, that can be really helpful too. So there's resources, so I hear you. I'm so glad you're here asking questions, and you don't have to get stuck. You're making all this progress. So, getting stuck at that point, please, use the resources.
Yeah, let me add something else too that
Mhm.
I've just finished a year-long program in sexual health, and they talk about the 6 pillars of sexual health. And I love incorporating it with my couples because it's things like consent. What do we consent to have be a part of this relationship? So there's a lot of dialogue around consent, right? We want to have a relationship where there is honesty. So what does honesty look like, right? How do we show up authentically and honestly? Shared values, right? So what are our shared values in this area? Um, we want to also have mutual pleasure. So, what is that like? And to dialogue around that. And a lot of couples haven't ever considered those areas. We also want it to be non exploitive. So, we want to make sure that we are equally participating together in that physical and sexual intimacy. So, those are all great areas to open up dialogue as well. So, I love approaching it from that angle too, because it can take us really deep.
Yeah, yeah. And part of the honesty would be, I'm afraid, I mean, like, that's a very honest, I am afraid, and, sharing that. Dr. Rob, in June, because I've referred to this one a lot, but people talk about, we want to be intimate again, and I'm like, well, if you're talking about sex, because people automatically equate sex with it, you're automatically intimate, and I always go, sex addicts can prove that you can have sex with no intimacy, but the intimacy is vulnerability. And he looked up the top 15 terms for intimacy, and none of them had sex. And he talked about, and sex is like the culmination of all of these other aspects. So if you're being vulnerable and you're connecting in all of these other ways, that can be, part of the progression of that. But there's so many ways to connect, that probably need to be in place before that. But I hear the fear, but gosh, it sounds like you guys are making really good progress, in so many areas. So yay for you both, and keep continuing the journey. So, okay, the next question. At what point in recovery and healing do you advise couples counseling? Are there certain signposts we can be aware of?
I just had somebody ask me this question today. Um, and so I think this is such a great question. I'm going to tell you what I see and what I'm making some changes even in how I approach this. I think you need to start couples counseling in the early days of discovery disclosure. However, we do have to do individual counseling. So I do think we need to establish in the early days, gosh, we've had this happen. What's the plan for us as a couple? So, how it shows up currently in my practice is I typically see the betrayed partner, or I might see an addict partner, and we start talking about creating safety. And we start talking about boundaries, and we need to bring the partners together. We've got to talk about that. What are the expectations? What do I need to create safety in the here and now while we are beginning these early stages of recovery? Oftentimes, what we do is we say, well, you've got to go work on you, and he's got to go work on himself. And then eventually, once you do formal therapeutic disclosure, we'll do couples. Well, if a couple is struggling, that's not going to work. So I think it's good to find a couples therapist who's willing to have you come in, or if your individual therapist is willing to have you come in several times in those early days and stages. I think that is a really good thing to do. But make sure that when you are going in, you're going in with, how do you need help? How do you need safety in this moment, especially in the early days? I'm getting ready to do a training on that because I do think from the very beginning, we need to learn how to have empathy. We need to learn how to validate people's emotions and feelings. And it needs to go both ways with both partners. And so, the really, really deep couples work, though, is going to be later on. Like I said, in the early stages, it's going to be establishing maybe some safety boundaries. It's going to be how we communicate. It's going to be maybe you've got, some sticking points right now that you've got to have somebody kind of help you resolve, maybe problem solve, come up with a plan. So in the early days, it's more about the safety piece. And then later on, when you're doing couples therapy, it's about the healing and the deeper healing piece. So that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, and as a company, we are in the, get the help. I love what Debbie was saying, and we actually agree with that. But that's more stabilization. Those are kind of like, we just need to make sure you guys, are able to exist in the same house or whatever your plan is, but we hear all the time people who have run off, our relationship is fractured, of course, and you're doing couples therapy, and often with someone who's not trained in any of these areas. There's no talk about this, and consistently hear that the betrayed partner is feeling um so maligned, because in a couples counseling, the coupleship is the client, neither of you. So there's no accountability for the addict, and it's like, what are you doing for this relationship? And you're going, I didn't do anything to, like, this all happened. And so it's really challenging. But I love what Debbie was talking about. The deeper couples work, the real couples therapy happens afterwards. And I often say, when you're working with your individual therapist, they'll help you, either with conjoint couples therapy with your individual therapist, or they know who is doing good couples work that they can talk to. Ideally, you've got the releases signed so that you've got this whole team of people who are working, to help support you through this process. So when people email and say, I need a couples therapist, and I say, have you asked your individual therapist? And if they haven't, then they're, oh, that's a good idea. Some of them are like, well, we don't have individual therapists. And I'm like, where are you in the process? Because I want you to have the best. I mean, this is tough stuff. We want you to have the best opportunity for success and healing. So, and I just shared this on something, probably another webinar this week, but somebody used this quote, when a couple goes to couples therapy and the addict partner is not, not in any kind of, recovery yet, it's like the two of you are in a rowboat and the betrayed partner is paddling like crazy. and you're going around in a circle because the addict partner isn't showing up, isn't telling the truth, isn't doing any of those things. So when there's true desire for real recovery and healing, yes, both of you getting help and then having that stabilization for couples, yes, and especially there's kids involved, you want to make sure that you are doing the very best job, and setting yourself up for success. But unfortunately, like I said, we often hear people going off to a lovely, marriage and family therapist who does couples counseling that has zero training in addiction, and even less than zero in, sex addiction and betrayal trauma. And, it doesn't go well. So making sure that you're getting the right help. If you've got individual therapists, be talking to them and ask them what the plan is and, what they recommend and who they recommend. Or like I said, there are individual therapists that would come together, so the four of you are together, on some basis too. So there's lots of ways to do it, and your individual therapists are going to probably be the best people to help you, identify timing and and how. If the addict partner is doing the work and showing up, great. That really expedites the whole process. So, but yeah, staying
Yeah.
regulated for partners. Go ahead.
And making sure you said it, but it kind of got buried a little bit in there. But the releases of information,
Mhm.
so helpful. So when I see, one partner and maybe they're struggling and they go to, let's say, the betraying partner's therapist, I have a release. So then we're communicating the betraying partner's therapist and myself. So we know what's coming up and they keep me, apprised of what they've worked on, which is so helpful because then when my client comes back in, I'm fully on board and I know what the couple was struggling with and what they determined that they're going to do.
Yeah. And how great is that? Then with that communication of like, okay, this is showing up, this is how they're showing up at, because of the individual therapist,
Yeah.
addict partner is going, oh, my wife is, and, to have the couples therapist going, nah, here's what's really going on. Here's some of these dynamics, is really useful too. So
Yeah.
getting the right help makes all the difference. So, okay. My CSAT wants to bring in my partner. We are 5 months in, so it would be the three of us, not his therapist. Is that odd? So I'm assuming this is the betrayed partner and wants to bring in his therapist. So the so that would be like you working with a betrayed partner, bringing in the addict partner. So
No, it's not odd. I typically do it because there's a specific reason. So maybe they're having a hard time communicating. So we're getting, stuck in something that we can't get out of. So we need to work together. Sometimes it's just to see where the other partner's at. Sometimes it's to be able to see both partners and in that session maybe problem solve how to deal with wherever you're getting stuck. So I don't know if you have a particular need. I typically like that. I like there to be a purpose. I'm bringing you in because, we're kind of stuck in, getting dysregulated. So how can we come up with a plan? Let's talk about it in session so we can kind of figure out where the disconnection's occurring. And okay, what can we do about that? Sometimes we do it so that we can even share needs and share, what you would hope the other person would do, making vulnerable requests, maybe even putting boundaries in place. That's another great thing to do, even just 5 months in. So, no, it's not odd. It just, as far as how I do it is, it's an occasional thing. It's not a consistent thing because I want to make sure that I don't all of a sudden become the couples therapist, right? Because I'm there to be the betrayed partner's therapist, but I'm also there to help the betrayed partner heal their relationship. And so at times, I'm the one who's going to help them facilitate when they're having a lot of disconnection and they're continuing to have issues in those early days before they have an identified couples therapist.
I hear it, and I know you work with addict partners as well, but I hear it often with the addict partners therapist having the betrayed partner come in more for collateral information. What is your experience on that side?
Yes. Yes, sometimes I will do that and I will even recommend, and of course my client is wanting to do that because they feel like, I don't know that they're getting the full picture here. I just want them to be able to go in and share with them what my experience is, right? And where I'm struggling. So absolutely, sometimes that is the best place. And I do that with some therapists who are working with the addict partner. And I think it's really helpful too for the betrayed partner to get to know their therapist, right? So that they understand and have understand maybe the work they're doing with their individual therapist. So yeah, there's some good, and again, it's about safety. I want to make sure you feel safe in doing this. I'm never going to force anybody, but if you think it's going to help, and again, we talk about what is the purpose, what's the intention, right? Because we want to go in there and we want to state that so you don't come out there more frustrated than maybe you went in. So it's really important that we have a clear understanding. And again, I really like having those release of information signed because I can do groundwork as well as the therapist. And so oftentimes I will call, the other therapist and I make sure all the releases are signed. And then I say, hey, you're going to be seeing, my client so and so. And I just want to kind of share with you what I see they're struggling with. They know I'm talking to you about this. I've got their permission, and here's kind of what they want to come in and work on in session. So sometimes, if it's appropriate, I'll lay the groundwork for the client so the other therapist kind of understands the purpose for everybody getting together.
Well, and you talked early on in the limbo about, and you hear this all the time, the betrayed partner is saying, my addict partner is saying, his therapist is saying, blah, 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 and I'm like, if you heard it from the therapist directly, and sometimes they do, because they're in that session together. But I said, otherwise, if you're hearing it just from the filter of your addict's lips lying to in denial, then you can't. So it does really, or it can provide that clarification for what really is going on as well. So but
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
it's,
Um, I know we've got a few minutes, no other questions, but what was
mhm.
really helpful for me is I know we've got people who are listening in, just understanding what the struggle is, right? Where do you find that you're struggling the most in your recovery, or what has been the hardest thing that you've dealt with? Maybe you've overcome it. So, if anybody's willing to share that, I would love people just to kind of put that in the question, because it really helps me in knowing how to meet people's needs and what you want to learn about when you come into these webinars. I'm a firm believer when we go to therapy, and when I went to therapy for my own betrayal, I wanted to understand what I was going through, and then I wanted to have things to do, right? Give me the skills and tools so I can work on this, because that gave me hope. So if anybody's willing to share, that would be awesome because, you know, I like to know.
So there's another question. My partner, the addict, is avoidant, has long-standing history of this in PA. I know this takes a lot of time in psychoanalysis to fix this. Is this recommended?
Well, there's a lot there.
I know, because I was like, if
Yeah.
your attachment style is avoidant, I don't know that you fix that. So,
Well, I do know that. So several things on that.
uh-huh,
And I'm just going to kind of not in any particular order.
right.
Um, we do know that when somebody has a long-standing pornography addiction, they're bonding with, right, the behavior of watching the pornography, maybe masturbating. And they're releasing all those chemicals in their body, right? Including, oxytocin, which is a bonding, and epinephrine and norepinephrine and dopamine and all that. And so a lot of times part of the recovery work is that we have to learn how to attach in a secure way. So oftentimes we find those who have had addictive or out of control sexual behaviors, they do have an avoidant attachment style. And that is kind of, they've done that because of their own shame, their own guilt, for maybe what they're doing. Again, they're not connected and working out of prefrontal cortex, the most executive functioning part of your brain. And so a lot of it has been driven by urges, compulsions, and getting into these addictive behavior cycles. And so a lot of it might take a little more than psychoanalysis. In fixing this. I believe it's a multi-leveled approach. I am very much about that. So it's finding a therapist who understands the addiction around pornography. It's about getting a good CSAT. It's about getting into a recovery program. It's about, understanding and identifying what's at the root of all of that, because you might have to do some trauma work down the road, which is going to be another thing that's going to help you feel more safe and secure in a relationship with your partner. So like I said, there's many layers to it. Some of the attachment stuff does come later on down the road, once they're in good recovery and they really have good self-awareness and they're understanding maybe family of origin and some of the dynamics and the roles they took on, and they're understanding a lot more about themselves. So you're right, being avoidant, lots of times it's because maybe they're in overwhelm. Maybe they don't want to feel certain feelings and emotions. Maybe they're conflict avoidant because they've learned that's how they survive in life, is I just avoid any kind of conflict at all. Meaning I even avoid hard conversations, right? I avoid even spending time with you. It could be because their shame comes up. I don't want to feel shame, so I'm going to avoid. So there's all of that they've got to learn about in their own recovery. So I would start with a good CSAT therapist that understands attachment. So they might even have some training in emotionally focused therapy. That is also has some skill sets in trauma reprocessing and understands all of that, because then they can kind of look at the whole picture.
And I should have grabbed this, but on the Troy Love does an attachment wounds, because addiction is isolating, and so we all probably look avoidant. But I hear you saying this person has been diagnosed as avoidant, so that's where I was going with that. But Troy Love has a attachment wounds. There's an inner child work group. There's a porn addiction 101. Like this is like, and I'm with Debbie, that a good CSAT, certified sex addiction therapist. If you don't have one, TAMI at seekingintegrity.com. Let me know where you're located and I'll help you find the right help. But even I always say, even the best CSAT, if you're seeing a CSAT and that's the only work you're doing, that isn't enough. This is like all of those things that Debbie was talking about, getting people, getting a tribe of people, getting connections to groups, all of those things are necessary. But yeah, porn addiction in particular is so isolating. You need your technology and that's it. So we find that a lot. But there's so many resources, and hopefully you as the betrayed partner are getting the support that you need. Again, I put the boundaries course in. There's all the drop-in groups. We did art for healing this morning in a drop-in group. We're going to do that again in April. So there's a lot of resources for you as a betrayed partner as well. And just like and regardless of what he's doing, even if he's in limbo, you can still take care of you. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to
So
take a picture of these so you can.
yes, thank you. Those of you who shared what you struggle with, it helps me so much. I hear words, I see words there like vulnerability, right? Feeling the unfairness, the ongoing sadness, even trying to find joy in the midst of all of this.
Mhm.
Man, I can relate to all of that. And so I would like to bring some ideas into the webinar on that. It really helps me to know where you're at. I do want to circle back around and say that recovery from betrayal trauma is hard. I've been there, I've done that. And it isn't a quick fix. I wish it was. But I do know that if you find the right help and you push through the hardness of it, that eventually, right, you get to a place where life will look different, but it will be your new reality, and there can still be joy in the process. it takes work. It does take time. And there's struggle. There is a lot of struggle. And I remember those days and I recognize it in the clients that I see. And so I really honor betrayed partners who are trying to heal themselves and also feeling responsible for healing the relationship.
So I will send you a pic of those so that you have them. Oh, there's one more. So, okay.
Yeah, did you get them
Um,
all?
yeah, I'm just going to get the last one. So, okay, got it. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. This was great information. Again, massive notes on all of this. So join us again. Please, if you have not already done so, sign up for the work group that Debbie's going to start I think in 2 weeks on boundaries. Like if you're struggling with all of these things, guess what? Working on your internal boundaries and external boundaries, will be a great starting point for you. And you've got the queen of healthy boundaries to help you. So I call you that all the time. So
You're going to work on empowerment healing in the first 6 weeks. The second 6 weeks, it's on the connection and rebuilding trust aspect
yeah.
of it. So,
And this is one where you don't have to take part one to take part two. You can take them out of order. Usually you can't do that with these. You can. So they're different topics. So yeah, if you find the May one is a better fit, rock on. But otherwise, I don't know anybody except maybe Debbie that doesn't need some help with boundaries. So I would encourage both of them. So
we all do. We all do.
yeah, but you can peel off a 4-part talking about it. I'm like, part one is, so it's all good. So okay, thanks everyone. Have a great weekend. Oh wait, one more. I'm gonna take a picture of this one too.
Oh,
Okay, got it. Okay. All right. All right. Thanks everyone. This will be posted on our website. Bye.